General Lee was a soldier and a leader of men, not a politician. And although several of the decisions that he made were politically very important in American history, he seldom discussed politics and almost never in public. Our Southern forebears never gave a press conference. But occasionally he would have something to say, and particularly his correspondence with the British historian Acton, not long after the defeat of the Confederacy. And this was about the time that Reconstruction was getting really underway. The great Commonwealth of Virginia had been designated the military district number 1 by the U.S. government. And Acton was the historian of liberty. He spent his life talking about or investigating and displaying how the concept of freedom and particularly constitutional liberty had developed. Gradually through Western history, and how it had gradually come to protect society and persons from arbitrary central power. And so Acton writes to Lee, not in the early Reconstruction, said that he regarded the defeat of the Confederacy as a setback in the progress of freedom. How about that? And Lee replied, I yet believe that the maintenance of the rights and authority reserved to the states and to the people, not only essential to the adjustment and balance of the general system, but the safeguard to the continuance of free government. I consider it as the chief source of stability to our political system, whereas the consolidation of the states into one vast republic, sure to be aggressive abroad and despotic at home, will be the certain precursor of that ruin which has overwhelmed all free systems that have preceded it. I think most of us that would agree that Lee's business about an empire, essentially, the consolidation that would become aggressive abroad and despotic at home, seems to me he had some pretty solid predictions there. And if we consider it as a description of the results of the war between the states, it seems to be a whole lot sounder than what Lincoln said was the result of the war, which Lincoln said, a new birth of freedom. Well, what is that? And we're back to the business of a humane, organic society. General Lee is talking about realities, something that's going to happen, that you can identify, you can see. A new birth of freedom is an abstraction, which means nothing but it appeals to every third-string intellectual who has come along since. We were discussing this point the other day. I thought of another example, which is not on my topic of economics, but General Sherman's famous statement, "War is hell." I didn't do all of those crimes. It was this thing up here called war, this abstraction. And compare that with Bedford Forrest, who said, war means fighting, and fighting means killing. He expresses the reality, and not only that, he takes responsibility for it. Two different societies. Political economy, the study of the proper relationship between government and economy. There is a Southern tradition in political economy, and it is, in fact, a powerful and long-lasting body of thought, eloquently and convincingly expressed by a long line of Southern thinkers. Jefferson, John Taylor of Caroline, Calhoun, the authors of the Confederate Constitution, the populists of the late 19th, early 20th century, the 12 agrarians of I'll take my stand, and in more recent times, the best exponent of this view is probably Wendell Berry. From the very beginning, the U.S. government, the new experiment, the new Constitution, the new Union, was considered by Southerners to be a matter of liberty and honor and mutuality, mutual support and protection. From the beginning, the predominant class in the North regarded the U.S. government as their personal money-making machine. They never had any other concept. Southerners saw the Constitution as the people's control over government power. Northerners saw it as an instrument to be manipulated in whatever way possible to their advantage. And this problem came to a head beginning with the struggle of Hamilton and Jefferson in the early days of the government. The Hamiltonian program was essentially to make the government an agent of patronage to the rich, because he sincerely thought that the government and the rich had to be united to make a stable government and an effective government. National debt, manipulation of the currency through a national bank, various types of business subsidy. Now, this program came to include internal improvements and a bankruptcy law for corporations, and most importantly, perhaps the protective tariff. This was all part of the program, and it all had the same purpose, which was to reward the capitalists of the North. I don't have time to get into all that. I wish I did, but I want to say a little bit about two of Hamilton's pillars, which are government debt and banking. No philosophy has ever offered a more fundamental criticism of the American system than has the Jeffersonian tradition in political economy. And it sees the system that we live under as state capitalism, or what Dr. Livingston referred to the other day as crony capitalism. This is not primarily a system of free enterprise. It is primarily a system where the government protects, enhances, and profits private wealth. That is its principal characteristic. The Jeffersonian critique of this kind of society is far more fundamental than the Marxist critique, because the Marxists actually like the situation because it's a step in their direction. You've already got the centralized economy in the control of a few people, so you just need a few more steps. And you have Marxism. Earliest days of the government, there was a supper which struck Thomas Jefferson so much that he made what happened struck Jefferson so much that he made a record of it. Vice President John Adams, Jefferson, the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, and various other dignitaries were there. This is the earliest days of the government. And John Adams always liked to exhibit his learning, and he was gassing on about his favorite hobby horse of checks and balances, which is a ridiculous theoretical idea which has never worked. People keep talking about it as if it were some sort of reality. But, he says, the British had this. The Commons and the Lords check each other. The King checks them so that nobody runs wild, There are checks to prevent anything hasty, ill-considered, or bad from happening. And fortunately, Adams says we have this in the American system. The House and the Senate check each other. The President and the Congress check each other to keep bad things from happening, to keep a majority from running wild and doing something bad. And we get this, he said, from Great Britain. And this was not long after the American Revolution. We get this from Great Britain, which is the best government, the best model for government in the world, according to John Adams, if it were only purged of its corruption. And but that's not what Jefferson noted. What he noted was Alexander Hamilton's response to this. "No," said Hamilton enthusiastically, "it's its corruption that makes Great Britain such a power." And that's, of course, what Hamilton's program, agenda, then being pushed in the first Congress, was designed to construct for the United States a government that was powerful and energetic like Britain's. And for this to work, the rich had to be in alliance with the government. And the way that you did this, Hamilton says on another occasion, a public debt is a public blessing. A public debt is a public blessing? How can that be? How can debt be a blessing? Somebody has to pay the debt. People who work for a living and produce something. And Jefferson reflects, is this why we fought the revolution, so that we've exchanged the British as our masters for a bunch of wealthy Northerners? But the big element in Hamilton's plan came with the opportunity of settling the debt question. And there was this considerable debt from the Revolutionary War of the Continental Congress and various states. And a lot of it was in the form of paper issued to pay soldiers and to purchase supplies in the war. The paper having become, as they said, not worth a continental. And most of the people who had received this paper had given it up by necessity, had given it up for a few cents on the dollar. And this paper was all owned by speculators, a few rich men, chiefly in New York and Philadelphia, who had bought it up for cents on the dollar. And the centerpiece of Hamilton's program was to pay off this debt in interest-bearing government bonds at face value. It's a windfall. And Hamilton says we have to do this to establish the good faith and credit of our new government, or else it won't be trusted. And we won't have to be able to raise money. And thus would the wealthy and powerful be engraced with the government, and we would have a government which could act effectively and forcefully. You now have the key to the great mystery of government finance. The Lincoln Republicans, why does the government need to borrow money? Why does the U.S. government borrow money? It has a huge income. Why does it need to borrow money? If it's meeting the budget, if it's not running a deficit, there's no reason for it to borrow money. But that is what it has always done: issued bonds, which people buy, and they receive tax-free, interest-free return on this return on this investment. And right now, the United States, this debt is approximately $20 trillion. And 45% of it is owned by the Chinese, which is something our founding fathers would have said, this is treason. Whoever did this should be hanged. But another example, not having to do with bonds, but the Republicans, after the War for Southern Independence, pulled a similar trick. This is what I mean by state capitalism. The war had been financed partly by greenbacks, paper money. The greenbacks were inflated down to about a third of their face value. And likewise, they had been bought up by speculators who had the money and the means to go around and scoop up these things. And after the war, the U.S. government paid off these greenbacks at face value in gold. That is what I mean by state capitalism. And, the people who had actually risked their lives, provided things, fought the war, got, nothing except inflated paper. Although the Union veterans did later get very inflated pensions. But the struggle of Hamilton and Jefferson characterized the antebellum American history, throughout that period up to the war between the states. Hamiltonian policies were argued over, and it shifted a little bit back and forth. The National Bank was chartered. It ran out, and then another National Bank was chartered after the War of 1812. But the Jeffersonians really tried to pay off the national debt. They almost succeeded, but not quite. And the Republicans got in 1861. With the South not voting, they implemented Hamilton's program with a vengeance. High expenditures, high tariff, government debt, a national banking system, and all sorts of other things that represent state capitalism, and which is what we live under today and have lived under ever since. By contrast, the Southern philosophy, it was expressed by a newspaper in 1843, a newspaper which supported the policies of John C. Calhoun. And across the top, free trade, no debt, separation of the government and banks. And it was taken for granted along with this. The government would not spend a lot of money. It's, so one of the ways to avoid debt, the government would spend only for those purposes that are clearly stated in Article 1, Section 8, that are the duties of the Confederate government. I expect everyone is familiar with I'll Take My Stand. Who knows the sequel, which was called Who Owns America? A New Declaration of Independence. The Southern Agrarian writers and joined by some Northern and British writers published this sequel called Who Owns America, which was to kind of spell out the agrarian program in more detail. But that's an interesting title. Who owns America? Well, might we ask, who owns America? You young people, when you contemplate politics in the future, and people are gassing on about this and that and trying to persuade you of this and that, think about that. Who owns America? Since 1861, the question has hardly been asked and has never been answered honestly by the prevailing political and economic powers of the United States. But the Southern tradition starts with that question. Who are we? Why do we have an economy? What's it for? What is the good of it? But if we ask the question today, who owns America? The richest 3% of the families own 54% of the national wealth, according to one calculation. The richest 10% own 75% of the national wealth. And most of the rest of us own nothing except mortgages and car payments and credit card payments. We are literally at the mercy of large institutions. We are certainly not the independent citizens that Jefferson said were necessary for a free society and a healthy society. In fact, the inequalities of wealth are greater today in this great liberal democracy than they have ever been in American history, and than they are in most other developed countries. And some people have, quite a few people, in fact, have observed that with alarm that American society is taking on the characteristics of the third world. A small group of very rich and a large group of very poor. Jefferson said, the earth belongs to the living. Well, and some people replied, including this little pseudo-intellectual Madison who never really understood what was going on. But Jefferson said the earth belongs to the living. And people said, gosh, what a left-wing proposition this is. You don't believe in tradition. And no, that's not what he was talking about. It's a very reactionary proposition. The earth belongs to the living. The present generation may enjoy the fruits of the earth in their time, but they cannot destroy the equal right of the next generation to the fruits of the earth. To preserve the freedom of the people, Jefferson said, we must not let our leaders load us with perpetual debt. It's deeply immoral for a present generation to use up the earth and leave the next generation with less than their just patrimony. And to leave the future generations burdened with debt from created by the previous generation having a good time. And leaving the debts to posterity, which is, of course, what is exactly being done on an immense scale by the United States government today. John Taylor of Caroline, the Jeffersonian philosopher, commented about this, the same situation. Says Taylor, the present age is cajoled to tax and enslave itself by the error of believing that it taxes and enslaves future ages to enrich itself. If that doesn't describe our present situation, I don't know what does. But of course, Lincoln, the Lincolnians in his party were able to install an advanced form of Hamiltonianism. Hamilton's dream that lasts right up to the present. John Taylor made a distinction between the producer and the speculator. There are two kinds of people, the producers and the speculators. The producers are those who produce, who work, who add to the world's wealth. And the speculators are those who manipulate paper for the acquisition of wealth produced by other people. It seems to me this is a very basic point about what makes a good society. And the American economy today is highly financialized. It is highly speculative. Most income goes to pay interest on debt. John C. Calhoun made the same point with an observation. There are two antagonistic classes in society, the taxpayers and the tax consumers. Some of us pay more than we get back, and there are some other clever people who manage to get more than they pay. And that's what government policy is all about. And the Jeffersonians had a point I think that is worth us thinking about. American conservatism, so-called, has largely been involved, as Russell Kirk said, with the acquisitive instinct. And American conservatism, Northern conservatism, has primarily been concerned with protecting the rich. This is why John Adams loved the checks and balances, because we couldn't help having majority rule in America, but the people had to be held in check. If you let the people do anything they want, then obviously the poor will vote themselves the property of the rich, and we can't have that. And so Northern conservatism has been largely this idea of protecting wealth from too much democracy. John Taylor turns this around. He says, this is all wrong. It's based on a false understanding of history and society. The masses preying on the classes and their wealth was a fairly infrequent thing in history. The masses were generally content to enjoy their own modest living. The norm of history was that the classes preyed on the masses. And this was done in various ways, by force and by fraud. And the British Hamiltonian public debt idea was the latest fad in the frauds that by which the politically well-placed preyed on the wealth produced by the rest of the people. As the great Robert Louis Dabney said after the war, Northern conservatives have never conserved anything in the entire course of American history, right up to the present day. And the Southern conservatism has been something rather different. It's been concerned with preserving our South, our society, our people, our organic nature. And that national debt, it can't be paid. I would take everything you and your children and your grandchildren to infinity had to pay it, it won't be done. It'll either be repudiated or inflated out of existence, or just repudiated. Let's hope it's repudiated. That's the only solution for the earth to belong to the living. And note what else has happened in terms of government expenditures. 2014, the deficit spending above income of the U.S. government was $483 billion added to the national debt. But notice what has happened. We no longer have any concept of the difference between spending for public purposes, for the constitutional duties, and spending to reward private people. You want to get a rock and roll museum in Cleveland. You want to get night basketball in Detroit. You want to get a bunch of obscene, talentless artists in New York to get grants. You put it in a bill that you know is going to pass. Earmarks. And so then the government is subsidizing private people in all sorts of ways. And of course, the whole notion of considering whether a particular expenditure is constitutional or not is died long ago. The Confederate Constitution opted for honesty, and it was based exactly on the experience of what the Yankees had done with the U.S. government and the Congress. The Confederate Constitution required that every bill concern only one subject, and that subject had to be clearly stated. And also, the president had a line item veto. Calhoun says this, in the 1830s, it's still very relevant, a habit of profusion and extravagance has grown up utterly inconsistent with Republican simplicity and virtue, and which was rapidly sapping the foundations of our government. It was impossible to force the minds of the public officers to the importance of attendance on the public money because we had too much of it. Our Southern forebears did not practice economics, which is largely today is a utilitarian study. How do we get the maximum profit? They did not do that. They practiced political economy, which was concerned with human well-being, and is a moral rather than a scientific study. They did not assume that man is entirely an economic being, and they did not believe that all economic conditions were determined by abstract laws, that economic conditions very often resulted from human decisions, and human decisions were very often the product of corrupt politics. They also did not believe that maximum wealth was the proper goal, or the only goal of economic activity. What about, the health of society is more important. Wealth ought to be widely distributed so that most people are comfortable and have a little bit of margin. Most people that earn their living are not dependent on others and have an adequate living and maybe a little more for leisure and luxuries. That is a healthy society. Also, we encounter a sense of stewardship, which is effectively absent today from American economic considerations. The Lord has given us a bounteous nature. Our task is to use it as we need for our sustenance, but as not to push it to the ultimate exploitation. Man does not eat. Man must eat, but he does not live bread alone. When I was a college undergraduate, half a century ago or more, a professor in a large class asked for a show of hands. He said, how many of you students believe that you will be better off than your parents? Probably 90% of the students indicated they thought they would be doing better than their parents. What percentage do you think we would get today? A recent study shows that half of the 25-year-old people in the United States still live at home. Now, people are dependent upon their parents who are able to accumulate some wealth in an earlier and better time. And unemployment and underemployment is now the settled lot of millions of people who used to be middle class. This is the direction of our great liberal democracy is going. And meanwhile, the very rich have achieved levels of wealth literally unprecedented in human history. As I am arguing the triumph of a northern version of political economy is what we have, and hasn't it been a catastrophe? It ain't very pretty, really, except for a few people. A little bit about banking and currency. The public debt, as Hamilton well knew, was bound up with the question of banking and currency. And this is why we have people pushing for a national bank. And Hamilton got his national bank. Republicans during the Civil War put in a national banking system. The Federal Reserve is a later development of all this. But what we have to understand is the so-called national bank is not a government bank. It is not a public institution controlled by the Congress or the people. It is a private, it is and always has been from the very first a private banking cartel to which the government gives powers, primarily powers to control the currency and credit of the country. The Philadelphia Convention voted down a proposition to allow the federal government to charter corporations. Corporations were questionable. They were immoral and irresponsible. And the writers, framers of the Constitution didn't want corporations, but as soon as the government starts, Alexander Hamilton says, well, I need this bank. We need to charter this bank corporation because I need it to do the treasury. John Taylor says, this is the first of countless instances in which mere verbiage was employed to subvert the plain intent of the Constitution. 1830s, the National Bank Charter was about to expire, and there was very heavy pressure to renew it. America's greatest statesman, Calhoun, working outside the two-party system, conducted a brilliant and successful campaign against the National Bank being recharted, and it was successful and remained so until the Civil War. He referred to the bank as an example of quote, modern ingenuity and dishonesty, which had deprived the country of a sound currency and caused great hardship, the fluctuating values of paper money. And a history of banking has pointed out that Calhoun really understood the situation. Andrew Jackson meant well. He thought he was restoring a sound currency, but what he actually accomplished was a proliferation of banks putting out more and more paper rather than a return to a sound currency. In 1863, Senator John Sherman of Ohio, the brother of the great military hero General Sherman, in the Senate, 1863, was pushing for the establishment of a national banking system. And he said, this is the most important northern goal of the war, to establish this national banking system. He said, if I had to leave all the slaves like they are, I would do that rather than give up this national banking system, which was passed. And they set it up, the national banking system, and chartering a series of national banks. Obviously, the granting of the charters was a political matter and full of corruption. And these banks, for a long time, basically had the control of the currency. They issued banknotes that were the money, were the paper money, the current circulating currency. And which means essentially they have control over the credit of the country. They have control over how much credit is available and at what rate of interest. And they had long ago discovered fractional reserve banking. This is the problem. The bank doesn't have to have any money. It can have a little bit of capital. People don't come and demand all their money at one and the same time in gold and silver. And so the bank can print out notes. It can loan money in the form of bank notes to much greater amount than it possibly has any money in the vaults. And as paper money proliferates, and eventually it crashes, but the bank has profited greatly from this. And of course, if people go to the bank and ask for their money, they don't. The bank crashes, closes the doors. Calhoun's words about this. In the 1830s, we must curb the banking system or it will certainly ruin the country. The banks have ceased to be mere moneyed-in corporations. They have become great political institutions with vast influence over the welfare of the community. It has been justly stated by a British writer that the power to make one small piece of paper not worth 1 cent to be worth $1,000 is a power too great to be trusted to the hands of mortal men. And he goes on to say, despite all these bad economic effects, the most fatal effects of this system originate in bearing on the moral and intellectual development of the community. When the greatest rewards of the community, the prestige, the wealth, go to speculators who have a bank and issue paper, instead of to the most learned in the professions and in statesmanship, science, literature, so forth, then it has a deadening effect on the virtues and the morals of society. The Jeffersonian political economy did not die all at once. We find Southern Democrats speaking this way all through the period of Reconstruction and after. Although one famous American historian has said that, portrayed the Southern Democrats as evil people who joined with the Republicans to cheat the poor people. That is not. There was some of that, but that's actually not true. There were a great many people who, Southern Democrats, who held to the Jeffersonian tradition and followed the Republicans and the industry-leading policies. The Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 was an effort to control the corporations. Who was Mr. Clayton? Mr. Clayton was Representative Henry D. Clayton of Alabama, who was the son of General Henry D. Clayton, CSA. The Georgia populist Tom Watson says in 1916, special privilege, corporate greed, concentrated wealth are divided throughout our union between those who call themselves Republicans and those who call themselves Democrats. Under the banking and bondage systems, all roads of produce lead to the Rome of the imperial plutocracy. And Frank Ousley, the Agrarian, says it very succinctly 20 years after that. And who owns America? The government is the executive committee of great wealth. You can bet when one of the Rockefellers from, it used to be Chase Manhattan Bank, I don't know what they call it now, but one of the Rockefellers calls the White House, you can bet the President of the United States answers that call as soon as he can. That is more influence than millions and millions of us have state capitalism. As I said, the crisis of the Depression caused a lot of discussion of fundamental reform of the regime. Communists and socialists were sure they had the answer, which is government control of property. Progressives thought that capitalism could be saved, but the economy would be managed by experts like themselves. And that's basically the New Deal, or the idea of the New Deal. I'll take my stand, and then followed by Who Owns America, took a different view of this. I would call it the last formal statement of the Southern Jeffersonian political economy. They rejected both capitalism as it now exists and socialism. People were asking the wrong questions. The capitalists and the socialists were not that far apart. They all took for granted the great concentration of power in a few giant corporations that essentially controlled the economy. And the capitalists and the socialists just arguing over matters of who controlled. What we should be looking at, the Agrarian says, was a system of in which the masses of people were not wage owners and not servants of great corporations, and at the mercy of great corporations. The U.S. had begun, as and for a time had continued to be, a society of widespread property ownership, independent citizens. The Agrarian says, we're all for free enterprise, we're all for private property. These are good things. But we reject the idea that corporate capitalism as it exists today is the proper expression of free enterprise and private property. As John Taylor said, a rich country is not the same thing as a happy people. It depends on how the riches are around. And certainly, he says, a rich government is not the same thing as a prosperous and happy people, which is something we have lost sight of. Capitalists, of course, talk about free enterprise and the evil effects of the interference with the law of supply and demand. The Agrarians argue that's fine, except big business doesn't practice free enterprise. It never has. It does not respond to the law of supply and demand because it is too powerful to tolerate competition. There's a lot of small-scale free enterprise in America, but not in big business, which controls rather than participates in the free market. They pointed out that with the Depression, the price of farm products fell by 30%. The price of steel and automobiles did not fall at all. It's something with the fall of demand, because the corporations were big enough to control the market. The tariff excluded their foreign competition, and they were powerful enough to stifle any potential domestic competition. John D. Rockefeller never did a decent day's work in his life, and he was the richest man in America. To show his New England public spirit, he went around giving dimes to school children. And it was not the socialists who hated Rockefeller, it was the entrepreneurs who hated Rockefeller. The people who actually did the work and the risk and who got the oil out of the ground found that Rockefeller had bribed state legislatures, had influenced railroads to rig rates, had bought refineries whenever they appeared, acquired and suppressed new patents which might help small producers in the industry. And so the producers of wealth were not able to market their oil except through Rockefeller and to meet his terms, which usually meant him taking over control. And what, after all, is so great about the concentration of industry in a few gigantic firms? Maybe it's true that a series of small factories spread through the countryside are more efficient than a huge industrial installation in one place. Maybe that's so. And there certainly would be a more humane system for workers and everybody concerned. And we have the great giant corporations, not because there's some economic law that dictated that they were more efficient. We have it because that's what the bankers want. They want the big corporation, which they can more easily control. And it was necessary to curb state capitalism, they said, in order to see that we have more independence among the citizens and more comfortable and independent living and profit among the citizens. That seems to me was a noble program, but of course it's too human and too noble to be considered. And they didn't have the money to buy the press and the politicians. And the vast herd of third-string intellectuals who dominate discourse in America were interested in other more trendy things. But it seems to me that they were correct. What they described about American society and its economic aspect was correct, and has declining prosperity and vast inequality of wealth has continued and progressed and grown greater and greater, and it is now a settled fact of American life. Economic health for them was not measured by the day's average of stock speculation, or the profits of banks, or the munificence of government subsidies and salaries and government buildings, or the consumption of luxury goods, or even by the gross domestic product. Economic health is when the great bulk of families have some property and a secure source of living, large or small. And in such a society, debt, which is all throughout human existence, has been the enemy of prosperity and happiness, debt plays a very minor role in a healthy society, which is mostly made up of people of middling economic status, with relatively few very rich and very poor. In such a healthy society, the government apparatus is rather small. It only does its few necessary functions. And government is largely local. And in such a society, religion, charity, education, the arts flourish as a private product. In fact, cultural cohesion seems to be one of the characteristics of a happy society with the middling class predominant. There's no diverse society which has this kind of healthy economy I'm describing. During the New Deal, the Glass-Steagall Act of 1932 was a late reflection of the Jeffersonian, the Southern political economy. The law forced the separation between commercial banking and investment banking. They were to do separate types of business. They couldn't do the same business, and that had been responsible, it was thought, for much of the abuses that had led to the Great Depression. The Glass-Steagall Act bears the name of Senator Carter Glass of Virginia and Representative Henry B. Steagall of Alabama. The repeal of this law by the Reagan administration, allowing the investment banks to get into all sorts of other things like real estate. The repeal of this law was responsible for the crisis that happened in 2007, 2008, according to many people. The big bankers and brokers behaved unethically and often illegally in derivative scandal, which was actually a form of gambling. They behaved very badly, the big guys, and the official watchdogs failed entirely to even know what was going on. And the crash came, and the big fellows, some of them were in peril of collapse, the big international bankers and brokerage houses also destroyed a lot of pension funds and small investors. And America was in bad need of a Jeffersonian insight at this crisis. Note that the only solution that anybody could find, the only solution that both parties supported, was to bail out the misbehaving bankers and brokers so that they can continue to enjoy their luxurious lifestyles. State capitalism, as I said, define it. The malefactors were judged to be too big to fail and too big to jail, as someone has said. And Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury, and Paulson, the head of the Federal Reserve, were lauded as heroes. There's even a movie about this, how these heroes got together and figured out a way for the government to bail out the big banks. They found a way for the taxpayers to bail out the offending banksters. Heroic action. And both Geithner and Paulson were formerly associated with Goldman Sachs banking empire, which was one of the greatest offenders in this whole derivatives scandal. And, we were told It's necessary to save. This is necessary to save our economy. Well, we're back to that abstraction. We're not helping people. We're not solving the situation that we really have here. We're saving our economy, whatever that is. The economy's stupid. It seems to have become a kind of monstrous god who has no interest whatsoever in the well-being of the people, the economy. And every once in a while, the priests of the economy will tell us what we have to do to, what sacrifices we have to make to keep the economy, our economy, keep ourselves in good graces with the monster god of the economy. John Taylor, 2 centuries ago, says this about this whole situation. A crocodile has been worshipped, and its priesthood have asserted that morality required the people to suffer themselves to be eaten by the crocodile. That seems to me to do very, very well describe the American economy. In our Hamiltonian world, nobody could think of anything except a bailout. The big guys. Think of that. Nobody could come up with anything else. I guarantee you that our southern forebears would not have permitted such an atrocity against the people to occur. And that is only one of the many things that were lost at Abbeville.